Las Vegas, Nevada, November 22nd, 1963. The Copa room at the Sands Hotel shone brightly under the sparkling crystal chandeliers. The air was filled with laughter, the smell of whiskey and tobacco, and the melodious notes of swing music. Dean Martin, a.k.a. Dino, was at the height of his career, the king of cool. With a half-smile, a martini in hand, actually just water, and a voice as smooth as black velvet. He was singing "Ain't That a Kick in the Head," his voice echoing through the orchestra. The audience of about 2,000 people applauded loudly. Women screamed. Men raised their glasses in a toast. Dean winked at a girl in the front row, then turned to the band, shrugging in a typical Dino manner. Suddenly, Eddie Marsh, the stage manager, appeared backstage. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he clutched a piece of paper. Dean glanced at him, but continued singing. He knew he had to keep the rhythm. The show had to go on. When the song ended, Dean bowed, sweat beading on his forehead. Eddie stepped out and whispered in his ear, "Boss, President Kennedy was shot in Dallas. He is dead." Dean's world crumbled. JFK, his friend, his spiritual brother, the man who had invited him to the White House, the man Frank Sinatra considered family. Dean felt an invisible punch to his chest, but he didn't fall. Not now. Not in front of the 2,000 people smiling nonchalantly. Dean gripped the microphone, his voice still deep but now carrying a different depth. "Ladies and gentlemen, I just received sad news. About 20 minutes ago, President John F. Kennedy was shot in Dallas. We don't have full official information yet, but the situation is very serious." A murmur spread like a wave. Some laughed, thinking it was a joke. He shook his head, his eyes reddened but not shedding tears. "This isn't a joke. May God bless him and his family." The audience fell silent. Dean took a deep breath, turned to the band. "Keep playing, guys. We can't stop now." And he sang. He sang "Everybody Loves Somebody. Memories are made of this volare." His voice was still sweet, but anyone observant could hear the pain gnawing at each note. For the remaining 60 minutes of the show, Dean kept the rhythm. He told old jokes, winked, raised his glass to the audience, but in his mind, images flooded back. Dinner with JFK, the laughter of the Rat Pack, the young politician's promise of a brighter America. When the stage lights went out, Dean stepped down, drenched in sweat. Frank Sinatra and Sammy Davis Jr. weren't there tonight, but the news had spread quickly. Eddie ran up. "Dino, are you okay? Are we canceling tonight's show?" Dean shook his head. "No, life goes on. But I need 3 hours, just 3 hours." Dean returned to his private suite at Sands, the luxurious room with a view of the Vegas Strip. He closed the door, took off his tuxedo, and slumped onto the sofa. His hands trembled as he poured himself a glass of whiskey, not water anymore. "Jack," he whispered. "John Fitzgerald Kennedy, the man who had changed America, who had invited the Rat Pack to sing at his inauguration, though Dean had declined for personal reasons with Sammy. Dean remembered their private meeting in Palm Springs, when JFK laughed heartily at his jokes and said, "Dino, you are what this country needs, joy in the midst of storms." Tears finally fell from Dean's eyes. He wept like a child, not for politics, but for the loss of a friend, an icon. He remembered his impoverished childhood in Steubenville, Ohio, with his Italian immigrant parents. His father, Guy Crocetti, had taught him that Italian men had to be strong, had to sing to heal their wounds. Dean had sung his whole life to forget his scars. Divorce, the pressures of fame, nights of heavy drinking. He picked up the phone and called his wife, Jean. "Honey, have you heard? Jack, he's gone." Dean's voice broke. Jean comforted him from afar. Then he called his children and Frank. though Frank was elsewhere and also devastated. But Dean didn't just cry. He started doing something. For the next 3 hours, Dean Martin, the man known for his cool and lazy demeanor, did things that would move anyone who knew him. Hour 1. Dean called the Sands management. Open the kitchen. Prepare food for all the night shift staff. And for the audience if they're still here, no charge. He paid out of his own pocket. Hundreds of hot meals were brought out. Italian pasta, steak, bread. "Today we are one family," he told the chef. He went down to the casino lobby. Many were still stunned by the news. Dean didn't perform, but sat with them. He listened to an old woman crying because JFK was her hope. He hugged a young man who had just lost his job, saying, "Boy, sing a song. Music will save us." And they sang together. "When You're Smiling." Hour 2. Dean called several friends in Hollywood and Washington. He arranged a private prayer service at a small church near the Sands for the hotel staff. He wasn't a devout man, but tonight he knelt down. He told stories about JFK shaking his hand, about the president's smile. He wanted us to live better. We have to keep going. Then he did the most unexpected thing. Dean sat down and wrote letters by hand. Dozens of letters to the Kennedy family, to members of the Rat Pack, to anonymous fans. In each letter, he recounted a happy memory, a funny story about JFK, and a promise to sing in his memory. He signed it Dino, with the words, "We will laugh through our tears." The third hour, Dean returned to the empty stage. No audience, just a few staff members and Eddie. He sang alone. "That's Amore," in the chapel in the moonlight. And finally, Ave Maria, the hymn his father used to sing. His voice trembled. Tears fell onto the microphone. He sang for JFK, for America, for shattered dreams. When the 3 hours were over, Dean walked out, looking at the brightly lit Vegas Strip. He said to Eddie, "Life must go on, but we must remember. Remember by loving each other." Dean Martin sat in his suite, the neon lights from the Strip shining through the curtains like glistening wounds. The clock struck 1 a.m. The whiskey in his glass was empty for the third time, but he wasn't drunk. The pain was too sharp for alcohol to soothe. He took out the Sands Hotel's letter paper and the Mont Blanc pen Frank had given him last year. His hand trembled slightly, but his handwriting was steady, the classic Italian slant of his father, Guy Crocetti. The first letter to Jacqueline Kennedy read, "Dear Mrs. Jackie, this is Dino. We didn't meet often, but Jack spoke of you to me as if you were a star. I was singing on stage when I heard the news. My heart is broken. Jack was one of the rare people who gave a lazy Italian like me hope. I don't know what to say except I'm sorry this country let him go. I will sing for him every night until I see him again up there. With all my love and sorrow, Dean Martin, Dino." He continued to write to Caroline and John Jr., children he had met at a party in Palm Springs. "Little ones, your father was a hero. Remember how much he smiled. Uncle Dino will sing you lullabies on the radio if you're sad." Dozens of other letters followed. To Frank Sinatra, "Frankie, we have to be strong. Jack needs us to sing louder than ever." To Sammy Davis Jr., "Sam, you're a warrior. You cried tonight and then got back up." To Joey Bishop, to Peter Lawford, to the stage crew, to the anonymous fan he asked Eddie to deliver. Each letter was a small memento. The time JFK burst out laughing at Dean's story about Jerry Lewis bullying him on stage. The time he refused to sing at the inauguration because he didn't want to embarrass Sammy about racial discrimination. The time Jack shook his hand and said, "Dino, you're the thing that makes America happy." 37 letters. When finished, Dean carefully folded them, sealed them with wax, and called Eddie. "Send them all. By private plane if necessary. No delay." The second hour passed. Dean couldn't sit still. He put on his coat and went down to the Sands main kitchen. Head chef Giuseppe, a fellow Italian, was standing there with a somber expression. "Dino, what are you doing here? Go home and rest." "No, Giuseppe. Open the kitchen. Everything. Pasta carbonara, lasagna, steak, hot bread. Free for all the night shift staff, for the remaining audience, for anyone grieving. I'll pay out of pocket." Giuseppius was surprised, but didn't ask. Within 45 minutes, the casino lobby and lounge area had transformed into a huge party. Hundreds of people gathered. Dean walked among them, not as a star, but as an ordinary Italian man. He sat with an elderly Texan woman, her hand trembling as she held a glass of water. "I voted for him." "So what now, Dean?" Dean took her hand. "Well, we'll have a meal, tell funny stories, and remember how he tried to change things. What song would you like to hear?" He sang, "Memories Are Made of This," just for her, his voice warm and low, tears rolling down her cheeks. Then, a young man, a recently discharged soldier, told her how he had once dreamed of being a pilot because of JFK. Dean hugged him. "You'll fly higher, because Jack wanted you to." The atmosphere was sad, but warm. Someone started singing along. Dean conducted the hotel's small orchestra playing "That's Amore." Laughter mingled with sobs. For those 3 hours, the Sands Hotel was no longer a casino, but a large home for people trying to mend their broken hearts. Around 3 a.m., Dean led a small group, about 20 staff members, a few loyal fans, to the small church of St. Joan of Arc nearby. His old friend, Father Luigi, opened the doors despite the midnight hour. They knelt. Dean wasn't usually a devout worshiper, but tonight he prayed in a mix of Italian and English. "Lord, take Jack. He tried so hard. Give his family strength, and show us how to keep going." He recounted stories. The time JFK invited the Rat Pack to the White House. The time he and Frank had a playful argument about martinis. The time Jack joked, "Dino, if you were president, America would swing all day." After the prayer, Dean returned to the empty Copa room. Only Eddie, Giuseppe, and a few friends were there. The stage lights were still on. No professional microphone, just an old guitar. He sang alone, Volare, the song that brought him to the top. Everybody Loves Somebody, a song he would later record and which became a hit. Then Ave Maria, his voice echoing in the dimly lit auditorium, tears streaming down his face. When the last song ended, Dean slumped to the stage floor, his back against the piano. 3 hours have passed, he whispered to Eddie, but the pain will stay. Dean recalled 1960. Rat Pack was booming at Sands. JFK came to see the show in secret. Frank introduced him as a friend and the future president. Dean sang, "Ain't That a Kick in the Head?" winking at Jack. After the show, they sat down for drinks. Dean only sipped. Jack asked about life, about family, about how to stay cool under pressure. "Dean," Jack said, "sometimes I envy you. You make people laugh without making many promises." Dean replied, "And you, Jack, you give them hope. That's the hardest thing." Then came the years. Dean declined some events for personal reasons, but the friendship remained quiet. He sent JFK a box of the finest Italian wine with the message, "Take a sip and think of Vegas nights." Dean didn't sing at the official funeral. He refused, knowing he would break down in front of the microphone. Instead, he called Jacqueline a few days later and sang, "In the Chapel, in the Moonlight," over the phone. His voice cracked during the chorus. He returned to work, but changed. His later shows had less alcohol and more emotion. He spent more time with his children, helped young singers, and frequently mentioned JFK in his intermissions. 3 hours had long passed, but Dean still sat on the suite balcony as dawn broke. The neon lights faded. He whispered, Everybody loves somebody. Sometimes. And Jack, you were someone we all loved. He stood up, preparing for tonight's show. Life had to go on. But from now on, every note he sang carried a piece of his departed friend's soul. As dawn painted the strip pink, Dean Martin left the Sands Hotel. He hadn't slept. 3 hours had passed, but the pain remained. His private plane took him back to Los Angeles the very next morning. His wife, Jean, was waiting at the door of their Beverly Hills home, her eyes red with tears. His children, Dean Paul, Richie, Gina, and Dina, ran to embrace him. "Dad, President Kennedy really—" Dina, his youngest daughter, asked in a trembling voice. Dean knelt down and held her close. "Yes, my love, I'm gone. But we still have each other." His voice broke. This was a rare moment when Dean Martin let his children see him cry. He told them about his 3 hours in Vegas, the letters, the warm meal, the solo singing session. "I don't want you to grow up in fear. I want you to remember that even if the world falls apart, we can still sing." The whole family gathered in the living room. Dean picked up his old guitar and sang "Memories Are Made of This," a song he'd written with friends, now taking on a new meaning. Jean sat beside him, her hand clasped tightly. She knew Dean usually hid his emotions behind smiles and glasses of wine, but tonight he was different. Flashbacks interspersed. Dean recalled his wedding day with Jean in 1949. He had divorced his first wife, Betty, leaving behind 4 children. Jean brought him peace. JFK had sent his congratulations indirectly through Frank. "Jack said you were so lucky, Dino," Frank recounted. Now Dean wondered if he was truly lucky, having witnessed so much loss. He spent the whole day at home. No Hollywood dates, no parties. He called Jerry Lewis, an old, estranged friend, to make amends. "Jerry, we've argued enough. Jack's gone. We have to hold hands." Jerry cried on the other end of the line. The two men reminisced, laughing through tears about their vaudeville days, when Dean was Dino Crocetti, the poor Italian boy who sang in the Steubenville bar. That evening, Dean sat down to write in his journal, something he rarely did. Pages were filled with entries about JFK. He was hope, I was joy. We both needed each other. He promised himself he would cut down on alcohol, spend more time with his children, and use his singing to heal. 2 days after the national funeral, the Rat Pack gathered at Frank Sinatra's house in Palm Springs. No champagne, no beautiful women, just whiskey and a heavy silence. Frank looked haggard, his eyes dark and sunken. "Dino, what were you doing in Vegas for those 3 hours? I heard Eddie tell me." Dean recounted the details. The free meal, the letters, the solo singing session in the empty Copa room. Sammy Davis Jr. sat silently, his hand gripping his glass. "Dino, I cried for 2 days. Jack was the first person to treat me like a human being, not just a talented black guy." Peter Lawford, Kennedy's brother-in-law, bowed his head. "The family is in ruins. Jackie asked me to thank you for the letter." They sat all night. Dean led the reunion with music. No large orchestra, just guitar and piano. They sang "My Way," which Frank later made famous, "Mr. Bojangles" for Sammy, and "Ain't That a Kick in the Head." Each song was a tribute. Dean stood up, his voice low. "Brothers, we are the Rat Pack. Jack loved us because we represented the joy of America. Now we must be even more joyful to honor him. Not to forget, but to bring him to life in every note." Frank nodded, his eyes red. "You're right, Dino. I'll organize a charity show for the Kennedy Foundation." Sammy promised to perform in the southern states to fight for civil rights, something Jack supported. Dean promised to reduce his schedule, dedicate time to writing letters to fans and helping young artists. The evening lasted until morning. They cried, they laughed, they hugged. Dean, once called the laziest rat pack, became a source of emotional support. He told funny stories about JFK to ease the pain. The time the president imitated his Italian singing style. The time Jack tried a martini and choked because it was too strong. In the months that followed, Dean changed profoundly. He recorded the album Everybody Loves Somebody, a song that became a #1 hit, as a response to the nation's collective sadness. In the liner notes, he wrote, "Dedicated to Jack Kennedy, the man who makes people love each other more." He organized charity shows and sang at small memorial events. One night in New York, he invited the Kennedy family privately to hear him sing in the chapel in the moonlight live. Little Caroline smiled through her tears. To his children, Dean becomes a better father. He took Dean Paul to see boxing, the sport he pursued in his youth. With Gina and Dina, he taught singing. "Kids, if you're sad, sing, like I did for 3 hours in Vegas." Final flashback. Dean remembers his childhood in Steubenville. His father, Guy, worked as a barber and sang Italian opera every night to forget poverty. "Son, Italian men can cry, but they have to sing to stand up." On the night of November 22, 1963, Dean did exactly as his father taught. In 1964, Dean continued his brilliant career but was more mature. He was less drunk, more sincere smiles. Every time he stands on stage, he spends a minute of silence for JFK before singing Volare. The end of those 3 fateful hours was not just pain but fire. Dean Martin, king of cool, has turned loss into the power of love. He lived on, continued singing, and made millions of people cry and laugh with every note. And every time someone asked Dean, "What did you do after hearing the news about JFK?" he just smiled sadly. "I sang, because that's the way I know to heal."